I'm really delighted to run today's session. It's funny, we were chatting again just before everyone came on. I think we had a session on tax the other week and this week's risk. And sometimes they sound like quite dry topics, but they're absolutely fundamental that you understand and that you get right. And I actually think it's really interesting when you dig deep into some of these topics and really think about what you're doing, because it can really guide how an organisation operates, what you do, and particularly I think linking it in with kind of some of the governance and your board understanding is quite interesting, so they know where all of this sits for an organisation. So I'm delighted to be bringing you today's session on risk management and social enterprise. I'm delighted to be joined today by Alison Stone, who is the, hi Alison, Cyber Security Resilience Co-ordinator. And she's going to really be, I guess, setting the scene for us, talking about that cyber security approach. And then we're going to lead into Garry Dalton, who's joining us from Keegan Pennykid. We've had a long-standing relationship with Keegan Pennykid at Social Enterprise Scotland. And again, they've done a lot, I think, with the third sector and social enterprise sector in the insurance market. And Gary's going to be talking about risk from that insurance perspective, which again is a critical thing to consider for your organisation. So I know you haven't turned up to hear me wittering on, so I'm going to hand straight over to Alison and get our session started for today. So thank you, Alison, and over to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about cyber risk. As Naomi says, this may not be the most exciting as topics, but hopefully my very short whistle-stop tour through what cyber risks are and how they can impact the third sector will be interesting to you. I'm going to be very, very quick. It's going to be very, very high level. I could talk about this for ages, but we don't have time to do that this morning. Questions at the end are more than welcome, or in the chat during the course of my chat. I'm just going to go and share my screen just now and hope that this works. Ooh. Right, can somebody give me the nod and tell me that they can see that okay? Naomi?
I can't see it yet, Alison, so.
Okay.
We have done the test, so we know it should work, so.
We've got to love technology, eh? Can you see that now? What is a cyber attack?
I can't, no. Do you want to shut down the screen share and just start it again? And if we're still having trouble, like any good risk plan, we have a backup in place, and I can bring up your slide set for you, so.
We do, hold on again.
That looks like it's going to come through.
That's great.
That we do. Thank you.
Fantastic. God, I love it when a plan comes together. Right. Okay. I will, without further ado, just fire through these. The session this morning is talking about cyber security for social enterprises. The presentation you'll see from the slides here is not one that has got SBRC or Alison Stone all over it. It's written by the National Cyber Security Centre. And a little bit about them. They are the cyber gurus here in the UK. They're part of GCHQ, and they are the people whose mission in life is to make the UK a safer place to live and work online. And I'll do a little bit of signposting at the end, but that's probably one of the most relevant resources that you will need should you want to delve a little bit deeper into the world of cybersecurity to get some advice for your organization. The NCSE website is absolutely fantastic, and they are our trusted source, so I would thoroughly recommend them. And as I say, this is one of their presentations. So we're going to have a very, very quick look at what a cyber attack is and what a cybersecurity is, why the third sector are at risk from cyber attacks. And you may think, well, you know, we're a charity, why would anybody want to attack us? But unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that every organization is vulnerable to cyber attacks, often not deliberately or at them specifically. It could be collateral damage as another attack, but we will have a little bit of a deep dive into that. And then just a very, very quick bit of information about what you can do to make yourself a little bit more resilient. So without further ado, what is a cyber attack? Now, cyber attack is a business risk. It's not an IT risk. Cyber is not down to the IT people in your organization or your outside sourced IT people. It's very much a risk that will impact your organization. And as Naomi mentioned, risk registers, it's something that should appear on your risk register as something that could potentially happen. So a cyber attack is when somebody maliciously, and that's the key word here, malicious is the word, tries to damage, disrupt, or gain unauthorized access to your computer systems or your devices. Now, damage could be something like deleting a database or stealing a copy of it at the same time. Disruption could be something like a denial of service attack. That's when a computer bombards a particular website with lots and lots of traffic with the aim to take that down and cause disruption to that organization. It's a bit like when you go online to Ticketmaster and try and buy tickets for Take That. Everybody's trying to buy the same tickets, so that puts the website under strain. Sometimes criminal actors can do that maliciously to disrupt the work that you do, to disrupt your website and to cause you an inconvenience. The thing about unauthorized access, they're looking to maybe guess your password or get you to hand that over by filling in quite a legitimate looking form. And the idea behind that is many of us use the same passwords for multiple websites. So if they can get that combination of your username and your password on one website, they can try it on different websites that may give them access to money or data, etc. So that's a little bit of what a cyber attack is. Cybersecurity is a sort of yin to the yang of that sort of thing. And it's all about reducing the risk of becoming a victim of that cyber attack. Now we, as people, as organizations, as staff, as volunteers, we live online, particularly these days now the pandemic's hit and we're all working from our bedrooms remotely from the office. So it's really important that we do that in a safe and secure way, because the internet is part of modern life and we use it all of the time. So cybersecurity is about putting some relatively simple measures in place to protect the devices that we use, the networks that we use, and the information and the data that is stored on that. So that's really what cybersecurity is. And it's not scary, although sometimes the language we use in the whole cyber world can be a little bit off-putting. So what are we talking about here? In monetary terms, the cost of a cyber attack, and I'm sure Garry will add some meat to the bones here when he talks about the insurance elements of this. The cost of a cyber attack can be very costly to any organization that is impacted by one of these. This data is a little bit old now, but the average annual cost for all charities that have lost data or assets in a data breach is just shy of £10,000. Now, I don't know many organizations that could swallow a £10,000 loss, and that doesn't actually take into account the reputational damage that comes alongside these attacks if they're not handled in the best way that they can be. So it's a big cost to the bottom line, and it's something that we really need to try and mitigate the best that we can, because it can be quite big business to these cyber criminals. And as I mentioned when I started, well, why are we talking about this for social enterprises? Why are we talking about this for charities? And we do have a sector that goes, you know, we're really busy, we're focusing on other things. This can be put on the back burner. Unfortunately, it is something that we need to think about, something that we need to deal with. Your average cyber criminal views any organization as access to funds, personal data, commercial data, financial data. So you are no different from the Royal Bank, for example. So that you are still, as an organization, a target to a cyber criminal. What else we find within the third sector is where there are data sharing agreements, or organizations are working to provide services to a local authority or a corporation. You often find cyber criminals will look for the weakest link in that supply chain. And it may be the case that they can't break into the Royal Bank's security systems. But if there is a third sector organization that has a data sharing agreement with them, or is linked in this supply chain piece, and their access is that little bit more vulnerable, your cyber criminal can use your organization to get access to the bigger fish. There is, unfortunately, a low level of awareness, particularly amongst smaller charities, that cybercrime is an issue that impacts them. And my work to the third sector has been going on for a couple of years, and I've barely scratched the surface on telling people that we need to deal with this stuff. So it's something that we're working really, really hard to raise awareness of. And the other thing, which I think is one of the really lovely things about the third sector, is that we have a culture of trust. We trust our volunteers to use our systems. We trust the person that phones us up and say, I think the work you're doing is fantastic, I'd like to give you a donation. And we willingly hand over our bank account details to them. There's not many organizations that would do that quite as willingly without some protocols and security around it. And what is the great stuff also makes us vulnerable to people who would abuse that culture of trust. So these are things that you just need to be mindful of when you're thinking about cybersecurity and why your social enterprise may be at risk for this. So who are we at risk from? Cyber criminals. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about the myth of cyber criminals. I have to read this because I can never remember it all. But it just really demonstrates quite clearly what the myths are around cyber criminals. So thanks to Hollywood, we have a perception of a cyber criminal, and it broadly follows this format. A cyber attacker, he, and it's always a he, is very young, late teens or early 20s. He hacked into his first nuclear missile facility at the age of just 5. At the age of 12, he started on bank heists. He's bought his first hoodie with the proceeds of that, and his face has not been seen since. He works alternatively for the Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean government, and spends his free time in his bedroom in darkness with green letters and green letters and numbers for his wallpaper. He's very clever with computers. In fact, he's so clever, he cannot be defeated. Thankfully, that's just an urban myth that has been depicted by Hollywood for quite a long time now. By way of a real life example, just to demonstrate how easy cybercrime has become, we're going to talk about Carl. Carl was working in a warehouse, earning not much more than the minimum wage, when a friend showed him where he could buy lists of email addresses and associated passwords. These had been stolen from various data breaches and were now being sold on for other cyber criminals to use. Carl himself did not have a fancy IT degree. In fact, by his own admission, he'd never been taught IT. But nevertheless, he began buying these lists off the internet and entering the email address and password combinations into loyalty card websites like Tesco's and Sainsbury's and the likes. Most weren't successful, but when they were, he would convert the victims' loyalty points into vouchers and then sell the vouchers for slightly less than face value on legitimate auction websites. After a while, Carl invested in a piece of software that would automate a lot of the entering of email addresses and password combinations. In the year or so before Carl was arrested for fraud, he made in the region of £150,000 from this very, very simple scam. Carl wasn't a technical wizard, the way that Hollywood portrays this. He simply exploited one of the common things that we all do that I mentioned earlier on, using the same passwords for multiple websites. So it's not the hardcore hackery types. It could just be somebody that is just trying to make a quick buck. And cyber criminals are motivated by money. They're after those funds. They're after that personal data that they can monetize on the dark web, or they're after getting those credentials that they can use to hack into your various different accounts and monetize that in some way. But the reassuring thing about making yourself less vulnerable to attack is that you don't actually need to do an awful lot to up your security that will stop your attackers actually targeting you. We're going to give some hints and tips very shortly as to what that looks like. But the way I kind of think about it is it's if you apply the can't say that word. If you think about a burglar, and you've got a house that has got an alarm, it's got a big barky dog, it's got barbed wire, it looks kind of scary and hard to breach. Your cyber criminal is going to look at that, and then he's going to look at your next door neighbor who has none of those protocols, those protections in place, and he's going to walk away from your organization and go to the one that is less complicated to breach, to get into. Cyber criminals don't like making an awful lot of effort to do what it is that they want to do. So putting even very basics in place will make you that little bit more safe and less vulnerable to attack. The other thing that we watch out for, indirect attacks. I've mentioned before, you may not as an organization be directly attacked, or you may end up just being collateral damage in an attack that is designed for somebody else. I don't know if many of you remember the WannaCry attack that hit the NHS a long time ago now. That was an indirect attack on the NHS that was allegedly put about by the North Korean government on something entirely different. It just happened to be that the NHS used the same particular piece of software that had been used for the delivery of this attack. So you could end up being part of an inadvertent indirect attack and collateral damage. Insider attack, yeah, we've got two different types of insider attack here. You may get a disgruntled ex-employee who's a little bit grumpy that he's left the organization, who may decide that he wants to really cause you an inconvenience by mounting some sort of attack. If for example you've not locked down his security the minute he's walked out the door. Or more commonly, you've got the inadvertent insider. That's somebody who works in your organization who not maliciously, but by possibly lack of training or even the desire to be helpful, clicks on a link to a phishing email that compromises the systems, the machines, and gets that malware, that bad stuff into your systems. We've not got a lot of time, so we'll not talk about hacktivists, terrorists, or nation states. It's probably the audience here today have probably not got much to worry about from North Korea and China. So we can touch on that another day if there's interest, or talk about it in the chat later. So how are charities being attacked? Now, you maybe read a lot of this stuff in the paper, and there's been an awful lot of media focus, particularly around ransomware at the moment. That seems to be the biggie, the big poster boy for all things cyber. Ransomware is when a cyber criminal gets into your systems and really ring fences some data, and then tries to infiltrate, takes that out of your system, and then tries to demand or extort money out of you to get that returned. We're seeing an awful lot of a rise in ransomware, and we're seeing a huge increase in the cost of ransoms that are being asked for. This is something that's happening quite a lot, and it's happening for the third sector too. Malware is basically malicious software, and that's something that gets onto your network, gets onto your machine because you've clicked on that phishing link, that dodgy link in an email, or you've put in a USB stick that has been infected. And one of the aims of malware is to help with the ransomware piece. It's to get into your systems, have a look to see what you've got in your systems, see what data can be monetized, or really just shut that down and cause a big inconvenience. Phishing is a whole subject in itself. We see phishing constantly, and it has got so much more sophisticated than the way it used to be way back in the day with the dodgy spelling or the Nigerian princes. That doesn't exist anymore. The quality of phishing attacks that we're seeing are very high. The emails that you're looking at that look very legitimate, look well crafted. There's stuff that you need to be aware of around that, but as I say, that's an entirely different piece of training. And the final thing or ways that charities are being attacked is fake organizations and fake websites. What you find very quickly these days after, say, a natural disaster, is that there will be a number of donation sites appear on the internet purporting to be claiming or raising funds for that particular incident. Often these are just fronts for organized crime that are taking advantage of that particular issue that's going on and trying to look like the genuine article, but to divert your funds elsewhere. So really that's what we are looking and worrying about. I try not to put the fear of God in people, although I'm aware probably in the last 5-10 minutes that I've been speaking, I probably have. It's important to say there is a lot of help at hand. There's a lot of advice. There's a lot of stuff out there that will help you and an organization make yourselves that little bit more secure. This is a really big topic, but there's things that you can do to start your journey. My position was previously based at the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations until a couple of weeks ago. SCVO have got a fantastic tool that we've developed, which is an entry-level cyber health check. And it really allows organisations to go in, answer quite a few very user-friendly questions, and it will generate a report as to what your status looks like at the moment. One of the real benefits on the back of that is you get referred to somebody like me who can say, okay, these are your area of vulnerabilities. Let's talk about how we can make you a little bit better. So do not be scared. Help is at hand. There's a lot of information on the NCSC website. We're also part of the Cyber Scotland Partnership, which is a new collaboration collaboration between 10 organisations working in Scotland around cybersecurity, and the Cyber Scotland website portal, again, is a fantastic resource to go and visit. I'm sure Naomi will follow up this session with some links, and I'll ping anything that will be useful across to you. I think that's me for just now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Garry. Was that okay, Naomi?
That's great. Thank you very much, Alison. I will be going off while Gary's speaking and looking for the SCVO links as well, and I'll try and post them in the chat, and we do try and share them through our Very Connect platform as well. So when we share the video, we'll put it out there. So thank you for that. And I've already got a few questions I've noted as I went down that hopefully will be helpful to people. But I'm sure we'll have more as well by the time we've heard from Garry. So delighted to welcome Garry from Keegan Pennykid. And again, obviously, you'll have that perspective from an insurance perspective that's important for organisations to really understand. And I think for me, it's about put the time and energy into doing this right. And hopefully it would bring down your insurance premiums. Would that be right, Garry?
Well, that's right, Alison and Naomi. And the scenario we've got here is an insurance-backed solution, if you want to call it that. And much of what I'll say in my slide presentation is going over what Alison's already given us, which is a good way to reinforce the detail that we're trying to get across to you today. And of course, talking from an insurance viewpoint, it's looking at the options that you have out there. And whilst I'm talking, I'm trying to share the screen. Let me just see if that is working. Is that okay, Naomi? Do you see that? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that fine. I was on mute.
Good. Okay. So again, it's again the management of risk. There's risk management itself is quite a wide topic, and there's certainly no way it could be squeezed into a small session today because there's various components out there. So looking at specifics on cyber itself, we do have to sort of take a viewpoint and give you detail today that helps you make an assessment as to what you do next, because the threat is certainly very much out there. On the screen just now is how the Association of British Insurers, the ABI, define the cyber insurance itself, or the cyber risk. And of course, that's again repeating what Alison said, is that it's damage or loss of information due to IT system breaches, etc. Again, repeating the idea as to what a cyber threat or what a cyber attack looks like, the social engineering side of things, and ransomware. There's too many to list in one sitting today, but the key ones are those at the top. Social engineering, which is your phishing email, and ransomware. And again, that's where the insurance products have pretty much driven themselves forward in the last 2 to 3 years. And that most insurers now offer an insurance solution, whether it's as part of an encompassing package policy, or indeed a separate standalone insurance that's specifically designed around what your exposures are. And of course, there's a lot of information that has to be supplied to insurers, which I'll comment on later. But ransomware is quite a big topic at the moment within the insurance press, because there's half an argument in there about the ransomware and the extortion cover that insurance policies can provide, as to whether that is actually, in fact, fueling the ransomware risk. Because if there's a belief and an acceptance that there's an insurance product out there providing cover, then where's the argument for denying or resisting paying a ransom, which is the feature of any attack of that nature? More to follow on that, of course, but there are various elements of daily exposures and risks which we are all there to try and combat against. So we have to accept that cyber exposure and risk is here to stay. The detail from insurers following their own surveys that they carry out is there's a belief that their policyholders have a degree of cyber insurance already in place. And there may be small elements of truth in that, but the actual existence of a bespoke coverage in a policy is very much less in reality. It can be as low as 10%, but of course statistics are always changing, and with the world that we now live in and attention being given to these risk transfer solutions in the form of an insurance policy, and then the statistics hopefully will improve as time goes on. Background and history continued. If you look at the whole idea, and touching briefly on what Alison had said before, the weaknesses are exploited by cyber criminals. And in the middle here, unfortunately, the human nature, the trusting element of receiving communications, we believe them to be genuine and truthful. So it can be email based, it's looking for passwords, it's internet, and of course, what we need to do is strengthen our knowledge and understanding so that we can combat against the threat that's out there. So we need to introduce new practices to our working lives, and where changes are required, then we have to enforce and bring those in to ensure that the business and the organisation is equally protected from theft of funds, theft of data, which could be personal and medical data, depending on what type of records you keep belonging to others that are engaged with your business. Cyber insurance is something that has grown quite significantly over the last 2 to 3 years, but it's been around for a number of years. It's not something that's classified correctly as an emerging risk, because the risk has always been there in some form or another, but because the extent and degree and the sophistication of cyber threat has so significantly stepped forward, and that we are seeing components here from business email compromises, which are effectively an inbound email to you from a genuine contact, but it's the contact themselves or the organisation you're dealing with have actually suffered the breach. So over a long period of time, what the criminals are doing is reviewing the exchange of emails between them and their contacts and customers, so that they can replicate that in an email chain so that it looks and reads as you would normally expect to see it from the individual that you have had a long-standing relationship with. And that's with a view to getting that our bank details have changed, please pay the money into this account. And of course, criminals are here to sort of extort money and get money in the most simplest of ways, and that's why they do what they do. It's for nothing else other than financial gain on their part. So again, what do we do? How do we know what our cover needs are? I'll give you a couple of examples of claims, genuine claims, which have occurred, and a quick summation at the end of the slides. There is a bit of a misconception as well, and it's worthwhile putting this into the presentation. But what you can see there, that 18.6% of information breaches, data breaches, network breaches are externally sourced. So less than 1 in 5 are actually a hacker event. There's a whole range of detail in there that comes down to human error, lost items. So it's not just the external cyber threat which produces a risk for you. It's looking at everything else by way of how you manage the internal resource and equipment, and that comes down to training and safe, good working practices. So insurance development, cyber liability is effectively your liability to others. There's cyber crime, which is effectively looking at your own funds protection. So there are 2 standards to look at here. Cyber liability is looking at the whole scope of what has been taken from your network if there's a breach. So once we establish and understand better the difference between the liability and your own first party risk, then we can be better fixed to present and give you quotations. You can therefore make informed decisions as to what level of cover you might want to purchase, should that be your next steps. Within historical insurance policies, there has been some belief that there is already cyber cover included, and that's not always the case. Devil's in the detail, as I've put in this slide, but as we move forward into the future, the wordings are becoming better. They aren't so restrictive, in as much as, if you can see the comment there about knowingly surrendered information, and again, that could be the information that's come from bank account details, making payments to individuals. It comes down to getting the detail from the insurance angle to make sure that there are no potential hurdles should indeed there be an event that you rely on your policy to respond to. And social engineering exclusions, again, that comes down to stopping your staff, yourselves, from falling prey to the phishing emails and clicking on links that you shouldn't do. It might not look like anything's happening, although there is stuff working away in the background for later trouble. So, small schematic, quite a busy screen here, but essentially 3 components to a claim. It's restoration of your site, the rescue and putting back in place so you can work again back to the levels that you were prior to the actual threat, and obviously costs involved in dealing with notification to the regulators, ICO for one, notification costs, those whose information may have been taken as a result of the breach as well. Many components in here, but they are all relevant and feature within an event itself. So this one, cyber claim number 1, employees arrive at work one morning to discover ransomware on their computer screens. Ransom demanded payment of money, otherwise, if not paid for by the deadline, that would be classified as non-compliance, then all data that was held in their systems would be deleted. Now, this was a customer who had a cyber policy in place. They then triggered that helpline resource, and effectively, for all intents and purposes, they then took over by way of the forensics to deal with the analysis of what the situation was, how severe it affected their system's operation. And if you think back to the former screen where there's a circle of detail, that helped that particular customer get back into operational level at the earliest opportunity. Because there was a threat and an exposure to information being taken, the forensic aspect showed that there was no blame to the client at the end of the day. So they weren't fined under the rules of GDPR for not having adequate protections. It was one of the situations where they were proven to be not at fault, but the actual cost of this claim in the end resulted at £75,000. So it's a painfully expensive exercise because of the components that are involved in the rescue scenario of any organisation and company if they suffer a breach. Second example, quite a more significant claim value itself at £200,000. But effectively, this was the outsourcing of internet systems to a third party, and the third party themselves suffered a breach, which meant their hosting platform could not perform. Consequently to that, the client could not use the system, therefore their trading arm, which was heavily reliant on being an online presence, was failing. That itself meant there was downtime, no financial income whatsoever, no orders, no payments, no clients effectively. And that's why over a short period of time, the losses incurred was £200,000. The claim at that figure included all the costs and investigation costs as well. So one thing to look at here is to understand the risk to you and expect that those that you're engaged as a partner organisation or an outsourcing have adequate facilities in place to recover from. And in that particular example there on claim number 2, the hosting site did not have adequate testing of their disaster recovery plan, and that's why it became such a dramatic affair for the client at the end of the day. So, cyber issues. Do we need policy cover? I would always advocate that you do, because it's an immediate response to an event that you can never estimate as to what the severity would be, and that's where you get the level of expertise and support that will allow you to recover very quickly. What you do is you speak to your insurers, your insurance brokers, you share information with them, but of course we're in a position where insurers are looking for quite a lot of detail, and that comes in the fashion of a quotation form or a proposal form, because we're not quite yet at the stage where insurers would make assessments based upon presumptions as to what levels of security you have within your network and how your operations actually work on a day-to-day basis. So again, where we have other insurance types that have been on a statement of fact basis, most insurers are not yet primed and ready to work that way, because they need to know exactly how you are protected from a network security point of view, similar to what Alison has said about the heavily protected property and the one that doesn't have any alarm protection next door. If you don't have adequate levels of security in your network, then unfortunately insurers would have a reluctance to provide any quotation or indeed cover at the end of the day. When you're holding information that takes various guises, it's personally identifiable information of those people who you have on your records. It might be medical data, so it's very personal. It's information that the criminals will ultimately use for their advantage, and funds, financial data, funds transfer threat as well. So before you can take the steps to looking at the insurance cover element, what information do you hold on people? Do you share that information with others, such in the situation where you have IT outsourcing, and how do you protect that and take confirmation from the others that you share information with that they are adequately protecting the detail too? In the world of GDPR, which is now over 3 years since it went live, we'll have to be extra careful when it comes to what we do with the information that we store on our networks. And we as insurance brokers are no different to that particular rule. So it's good common sense to know that what you're doing and how you're doing it is as safe as possible. Assess the risk that you have. Look at the media platform that you operate within. If you have portable devices, are those devices carrying encryption capabilities? And if we use the example again of the WannaCry from a few years ago, that all stemmed from people not updating their software house within their network, and that's what exposed them to the threat and the impact that the WannaCry was upon the world, because it wasn't just a localized event. So again, it's making sure that the staff that you have are doing as you would want them to do, staying safe, and of course making sure that any portable items, if they fell into the wrong hands, they are encrypted to try and prevent as much as possible, the information being given freely to them. So the insurance policies, they always determine a selected level of indemnity, and that again is driven by your needs, that there isn't a market standard to say it's X amount, it's a selectable level of cover, and it can be broad ranging from the point of the cyber liability risk, which is just for third parties and the information that you hold on them, or it can of course be the cyber crime element, which is first party, looking after your own financial affairs, and equally you can have a combined policy or one for each. That's pretty much a flash through the world of insurance as a solution to the risk exposures, but equally any questions that come through, I'm happy to deal with those, Naomi, and I can quite happily hand back to you if that's suitable.
Great, thank you very much, Garry. I mean, that was a really useful overview, I think, from both of you. And I might ask if you stop your screen share, and we'll bring Alison back for Q&A. And there's a few, I've seen some stuff come through in the Q&A section, and I also try and pick up questions I think that maybe sometimes people are too frightened to ask, or are thinking, oh, is that a daft question? So I'm always there to ask the daft questions on everyone's behalf. So there you go. So I've got a couple, and perhaps coming back to you as a starter, I guess we've all moved very much into a digital way of working in the last 12 months, whether that's, I mean, we've certainly come across organisations that have had issues using Zoom as a platform, which is why we're quite careful even how we share links to attendees before everything might appear last minute. It's very deliberate so that we don't get people coming on and sharing anything inappropriate. We've obviously moved to remote working for lots of staff. So I just wanted to ask Alison, has that led to an increased risk around cybersecurity in the last year, or has that risk always been there? And I'm trying to understand, is it a misconception of me that I think we're at greater risk now we've got greater digitalisation, or has the risk always been the same?
That's a really good question, actually, and it's multifaceted. I mean, there was very rapid adoption at the start of the pandemic of digital tools, particularly around the third sector, so organisations could continue to deliver services to their users. And one of the things that we feel has happened, and that adoption of that was a great thing. It moved forward the digital agenda in a way that it's never been moved before. But there is a worry that these things were done in haste without the real forethought of security in mind. So this feels like a really good time now to go back and revisit systems that you put in place at the start of the pandemic, to make sure that the appropriate security measures around those systems are there. Working from home does have its own risks. I mean, we're using the Wi-Fi in our house. We may not have changed the root password as it came out of the box. A lot of third sector organisations couldn't afford to provide working from home devices to their staff, to their volunteers. So you've probably got some element of bring your own device culture, where you've got an iPad that you use to do your day's work, and then you give it to your eldest daughter to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. So you've potentially got some vulnerability with shared devices. And the other thing that we found during the pandemic, and we started writing the Cyber Resilience Bulletin as a result of that, was the amount of scams that came out of the pandemic were absolutely astonishing. Your cyber criminal, when there was an issue around PPE, about 4 seconds later you got a scam around PPE. The current scam at the moment is, now the world's opening up a bit more, holiday scams. So there's been a huge amount of mileage made out of the pandemic by your cyber criminals from a scam perspective. GDPR still applies whether you're at home or in a work environment, so we still have to be mindful of looking after personal data and all that sort of governing. So it's a different thing. It's changed the focus of cyber risk, but cyber risk has always been there. And whilst people are using IT setups, there'll always be people wanting to take advantage of them. Does that help?
No, thank you. I think it's useful to get that kind of perspective a little bit more, because again, I think we've all had to. The other thing I was just thinking as I was talking about kind of increased use of the digital environment is even from a finance perspective, whether that's sales used to be in retail units, and the social enterprise sector will have moved. We've seen it ourselves much more into online sales. So again, lots of that financial information is much more out there than it's probably ever been before. So I just wondered if there's what would you advise are the ways if people are trying to, whether it's crowdfunding platforms or people advise them on wanting to give donations, is there a sense of good practice out there in terms of how social enterprise and charities can take those without giving out bank details?
Not really. I'd need to do a bit more digging and ask some colleagues at SCBO if they've come across anything that is helpful in that perspective. And what, as I mentioned in my presentation, what you do see is quite a lot of fake websites. I went on to watch a concert that had been advertised on Facebook during the pandemic. And there was a notice put out on the platform that the links that they were sharing to who they were fundraising for had been diverted to cyber criminals about half an hour before this concert was due to kick off. So I think just being really, really aware that what you're looking at and questioning, doing that hover over the bar at the top just to make sure it's a secure platform, it's a correct sounding website address. Just use a little bit of a caution. Take 5 and think, it's what I'm being asked to do. Sensible, good practice, legitimate.
No, thank you. I think sometimes it's also if you've got an inkling that something's not quite right,
go with the gut.
Don't ignore it as well, because I think we all kind of do that kind of, oh no, I'm just being daft. But if there's an inkling, really, like you say, dig deeper, look for this. I forget, correct me on the proper term, but there's a way of knowing if a site's kind of secure or not in terms of the There's a little padlock image, if I'm right.
Yeah,
is that?
That's right. That's the secure site. Yeah.
So just knowing some of that, I think, is really helpful. And thank you for that. I'm gonna ask Garry, and you touched. I mean, it was really interesting, particularly I think having the numbers and the data while you were speaking. I was looking up, and again, it's public, so I feel I can say it, but obviously people will have seen in the news. SEPA got a big cyber attack this year, and I was actually reading on the BBC News that in April, I think they estimated that their costs of that were 800,000, and they'll still be working on dealing with that cyber attack through the year 21-22. So, and you would perhaps think, well, why is SEPA interested? In the same way that I think sometimes we go, well, why are people interested in charities? I think it's, don't assume that you're not of interest to people. It's always better to be safer and assume that you will be of interest and take measures against it than it is to think, oh, well, no one will be interested in what we've got. So I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to just pick up with you. You'd referenced quite a lot around GDPR. And again, that's been quite a piece of legislation, I think, for lots of organisations, particularly smaller ones, to get their head around as well. So again, do you think that now there's more of those rules around GDPR, is that, and obviously the potential of fines if you've done that wrong, has that made the cyber risk greater because of the link to the GDPR and the data sharing risk, Garry?
I think the risk hasn't changed, but it's the response to that risk that you take to try and protect yourself better, because the notification element or notification coverage within an insurance policy is one part of the whole suite of rescue, I suppose. So with the GDPR, if there's an event, you have the clock ticking at 72 hours from discovery. So it's the message that goes to all the regulators, but it's not just them, it's also those whose records and information you keep. What's the severity? And of course, that is assessed from the forensic side of things as to what areas of the network have been compromised. And only then can you try to understand where money would be spent more quickly from an insurance coverage point of view, because £100,000 might sound like a lot of cover, but that would quickly disappear in a short period of time because of the costs involved in the forensics aspects itself. It doesn't come for cheap. That's the way to look at it. And the insurance policies there, it's that hotline number, it's the report, and then they take over. Now, there are other parts that you would then respond by communicating with parties, etc. But as a first point of rescue, speak to the insurers and let them know that there's an event happening, but you don't know what that event is ultimately driving towards. Ransomware is one thing, because it will say on the screen, you're locked out until you pay us whichever amount of Bitcoin or whatever it is they're looking for. But you're right, we don't know the numbers because there isn't a common theme there. We have the Colonial Pipeline in America, which was targeted not so long ago, and there was suspicion they paid in excess of 4 million ransom to have their system back on, because effectively they controlled the power in the eastern seaboard of America. But the most recent news on that is that this partner recovered most of it. So whether there's an argument to say, well, don't pay a ransom, but if you've recovered it, then there's another aspect to the story there. But there's an insurance broker down in Doncaster who were equally targeted. They were held to ransom for 15 million. So that a large global organization gets a ransomware for $4 million. But yes, an insurance industry office gets a 15 million. It's just a number to the criminals. It's what they can get, I suppose, more than anything else. So and it's tough, isn't it? Like Alison said, we don't want to frighten people with this webinar at all. That's not the aim of it, but we just want to make people aware that, don't assume it can't happen to you, and be prepared and think that through, I think is a question. And actually, even in the chat, we've just had someone come up saying they received an email about changing bank account numbers for making payments. It looked like an original email, but it was fake and the money was paid in good faith. So again, I think we're all starting to get used to when you receive an email, particularly one from the bank or someone asking for payment, and I've had to do this, I guess, with my parents in the sense of, don't do anything, ring the bank and check it's legitimate before you do anything. And I think that same rule will apply, but it's very easy because actually they're very clever.
They are.
And it's very easy to make a site or a page or an email signature look exactly like the real thing. It's good graphic design. It's nothing more complex than good graphic design. Would that be? I don't think I'm oversimplifying it when I say that.
No, not at all. I mean, the days of phishing attacks, talking about Nigerian princes and the likes, have long gone. I mean, this stuff is incredibly sophisticated. I mean, you've got the right idea when you say when you do it for your parents, you lift the phone and phone the bank, and do that with your suppliers. If you get a request to change the bank account details, go to a number that you trust, not one that's written on the invoice that you've received, and phone the finance people and say, look, we've had a request to change the details here, and just check that it's legitimate. Because that quick phone call might be the difference between you providing funds elsewhere.
Absolutely, and I think again that tip of don't assume even if you get an email that the number on that email is the correct number to ring. Do an independent search, and I think it's it's a balance, I think, and I think it's why it's interesting having the kind of practical perspective coming through in today's session and the insurance perspective, because you kind of need. We're almost saying you kind of want to look at both. You want to look at what you might need to insure against, but what are the very practical steps that hopefully mean you never have to put in an insurance claim, because ultimately we want the insurance as backup, but we need to try and do everything to avoid ever getting to that point. I think that's where we're all trying to be. I wanted to ask perhaps a broader question, if I may, Garry, and you may have seen it come through the Q&A, so I hope it's not a surprise, but it's perhaps a broader question than just the cybersecurity, and I'm putting it to you, obviously, given the broader insurance background, if that's okay. Just tips and advice, really. Someone was asking about how within their board and within the governance of their organisation, they perhaps look and manage risk more widely for their organisation. And obviously at the start, I spoke a little bit about risk registers. I just wondered if you got any advice around that frequency. I mean, I'd started to put some notes together. If you go online, you can search various templates for risk registers. And I know within the organisation I'm involved on the board, we do certainly an annual review of our risk register, and we're always keeping it in mind as we go through. But is there anything you could share with us from your perspective, Garry, first of all?
Yeah, happy to do that. And as I said at the start, there's various areas of risk management, risk control. And if anyone was to put their hand up and say we consider coronavirus to be the biggest threat of the moment in the pandemic rescue, then I wouldn't be able to argue successfully that is such a huge concern just now. And again, we're getting to the point of lockdown restrictions being eased, people returning to the workplace, what controls are in place to protect staff and visitors to the premises as well. And you only need to look at the retail sector to see how they control risk as far as they practically can. But again, let's exclude cyber, because that's one part. But there seems to be so much focus on coronavirus and COVID, the actual other risk control measures that were always there in daily life before 2020, such as fire risk assessments, looking after the premises, dealing with electrical controls, security levels. There's a whole range of things in there. You know, regulations are still there. They haven't disappeared because something else bigger has happened. They're just maybe not in everyone's immediate focus just now. So cost regulations, electricity at work, safe working practices, PPE of a type that's not focused on coronavirus itself. You know, they are very much there. And risk templates, risk register templates on our own website, you can download a free link in there as well, which lets you compile after you've assessed what the exposures are. So again, risk management and risk control comes down to that point. It's a continual cycle of assessment, review, update, and then you go back to the default again. So you don't do it in January and then don't reconsider it again until 3 years later. It's a constant, because the world's ever evolving. And as we've had a lot of businesses, charities, organisations, etc., sort of repurposing through the pandemic as well, they're doing things they never did before. And that's another area where, well, are you up to speed with what's required of you? And have you actually, well, for our part, have you told your broker or your insurer that you're doing something new? Because that could be an issue down the line if something went wrong in that particular activity which you've started doing but hadn't actually disclosed it to the insurers. So yeah, it's a constant wheel of change, albeit nothing much might change, but it's always the right thing to review and monitor it to make sure that you're doing as much as you possibly can to protect from all risks, rather than just the cyber element we've got just now.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I might try and see if I can put a link to, or we put a link to the website where you can find maybe that template risk register, but there's lots out there, and find one that works for you, I think, as well. And I think someone's already starting to put up various guides as well here that are helpful to people. And again, I always think, you know, as well as the kind of legislative environment that you've just touched on in terms of health and safety, and obviously COVID, I know one of the organisations I've worked for, we've just done a completely separate risk register just for COVID. So we're monitoring those two things kind of in conjunction, rather than losing sight of the original risk register. That's still the same, but again, thinking it through from a kind of social enterprise perspective, you know, I always say, you know, have we got too much reliance on key staff, and what would the impact on the charity be if the CEO suddenly left, or a key member of the team? What's our risk if we're funded by one funder? You know, so it's looking at that broader people, finance, activity related, and then again, for organisations that are going down big capital project routes, they'll have different risk registers associated with a specific capital project. So again, I think it's look at the registers and use them and get pointers. And I think there is lots of advice out there. And I think through networks like a COSFO, through Social Enterprise Scotland, we can hook you up with other people that have perhaps a bit further down the line in terms of pulling those risk registers together. So I hope that wasn't too much of a diversion into much broader risk, but it came up as a question, so I didn't want to ignore it. I've just got perhaps a final question, and then I'll perhaps ask you to come in with some kind of just a top tip. In fact, I've got two final questions. One, perhaps, is doing a backup enough? So, you know, can you assume if you've done a backup, you're all okay? I'll perhaps ask Alison that one.
Right. I would have said yes a while ago. It's still very good practice. It's absolutely vital, and that may be the thing that, should you get hit by ransomware, will be the thing that helps you recover. Caveating that slightly now, in the nature of ransomware has changed over probably the last 6 months to a year, and what we're finding now, and I think this was possibly the case with SEPA, although I could be speaking out of term, is that cyber criminals are getting into your network, and whereas before they would get into the network, identify the data, and then make their presence felt, make their demand very quickly, we're finding with ransomware now, these cyber criminals are taking their time getting into the network, spending a good amount of time having a good route around, and seeing what data is important. They're also impacting and infecting the backups. So the first thing you know now that you have ransomware is when you get the demand. They extract the data, then you get the demand, but they could have been there for a while, and they could have impacted your backups. So it's a two-pronged answer. Backups are really good practice, and should absolutely be done. But just because the ransomware has changed, you can't absolutely expect that you will be able to recover from backup if that's been something that has been there for a while.
Thank you, because I think, again, I'm trying to help people understand, hopefully. I've been caught out by not having done a most recent backup and then losing stuff on a computer, but that wouldn't have got me through a ransomware attack, but it certainly gave me the backup lesson that I needed. So
yeah, absolutely. No, backups are good. Absolutely. Yeah, must be done.
And I'm perhaps going to ask, just in terms of closing off today's session, I guess I always think, what are if you were to tell people what's, as a result of coming to this session, what's the thing that people should look at straight away in terms of reducing their risk from cybersecurity, and what is it they should be looking to review just as they move forward? And I'll perhaps come to Alison, and then perhaps Garry, just come to you in terms of what are perhaps the top 3 steps that you might tell people to take.
Okay. I feel like I have been just a prophet of doom today. I feel like I've been terribly gloomy. So I think the first thing I would absolutely say is this stuff does sound a bit scary. I have painted a little bit of a black picture. but it's not. There's help at hand. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of ways of getting advice and help. My role is to help people in the third sector, social enterprises, to be that a little bit more resilient. And my email address is always open if somebody wants some more advice. The National Cybersecurity Centre I mentioned has got some great resources. They've got a thing called the Small Charity Guide. That's a really good place to start. The SCVO Cyber Health Check, again, it's really entry-level stuff. And again, that's another good place to go find out exactly what you don't know that you don't know, and then speak to somebody like me who will hold your hand through that next wee bit of the adventure. But I think I just need to say that you don't need to spend a lot of money putting a lot of complicated systems in place. There's some real fundamental stuff that's really simple to do, really good practice that we've not had time to chat about today. But you can put this right, and you can be that little bit more resilient quite simply, quite easily, without a lot of cost. So don't be scared.
Thank you, Alison. And maybe we'll have to bring you back sometime and we can do that simple going through those basic checks with people. If people are interested, do say in the chat, because we can always do that. Garry, in terms of kind of the top thing from you, what would your key advice be to people just as we bring the session to a close?
I think it's always going to be the case, except that the risk is always going to be there, and it's also going to improve and become more sophisticated. So the continual threat is something we need to live with going forward. Second part would be to know and understand how safe your network is from a security point of view. I wouldn't be wrong to say that we've had some proposal forms come through our doors, and people just simply don't know what their network's like. And that's how they've answered it. They haven't answered yes or no to particular questions. They've just said, we don't know. So to present that to an insurer, you can understand what kind of response you would get. So it's having the belief that you're protected, but being able to evidence it, know what it is that your IT providers or your security levels are, rather than just believing it's something that's there, because the harsh reality is that it just might not be. So it's better to know, be informed, than make guesswork of it all.
Absolutely, and particularly when there's all this free advice out there, get the advice, I would say, before seeking the insurance, because the clearer you are on your form, the easier it then is for them to work with people like yourself. And again, potentially, you're putting yourself across as a less risky organisation if you've done that groundwork and shown you understand it. So it's really important that you do that, I think, as an organisation. And Alison, you've said it, so hopefully people will certainly find it the case that the guides have been simplified. They've not been set up as complex things to go through, just simple steps geared towards some of the smaller organisations that we might have. So I guess if you have any questions, Alison, I guess, has kindly said that she's there and available to support people as well. I've shared the SCVO link. There's lots of advice out there on risk register templates, and do visit the Keegan and Pennykid side, and they've got a template that you can use on a risk register as well. So there's lots out there. I guess use it. Don't. It's something people often put off, I think, going through their risk. It's not perhaps always the most exciting, but it's fundamental that you understand it, I think, for your organisation. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to our two contributors today. Really useful for people. And I can see already, feedback's coming through in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we can always get you back if we think we need to revisit this and go through those steps. So thank you very much, Alison and Garry.
No, not at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.